Noddy Holder's voice could shake stadiums. His career was legendary, with broken records, fans that were electrified, and a legacy that will live on in rock history. But what transpired after the lights went out was not at all like what people thought it would be. Behind the celebrity were broken relationships that never healed, choices that would haunt him, and a twist so bad that it almost hushed his famous roar. Noddy Holder is 79 years old now. And the reality about how he got here is so sad that it's hard to believe. The ascent of Noddy Holder. Noddy Holder is frequently mentioned when people talk about British rock heroes. His voice, look, and music helped shape a whole era. Noddy's voice is still heard on radios every Christmas, and he was the sound of the 1970s in the face of glam music. But the rise of Noddy Holder was amazing, and what happened after he became famous stunned everyone. Noddy Holder came from a working-class family that needed every penny. He was born in 1946. Music wasn't something that his family did or that he got a large chance to do. He had to seek it on his own, and it quickly became evident that he had a natural talent. Noddy had already created his first band, the Rockin' Phantoms, by the time he was 13. Noddy was already on stage with a microphone while other youngsters were still trying to figure out what they wanted to do. Singing songs with a voice that everyone could hear. Noddy's voice sounded unusual even back then. It was loud, hoarse, and strong enough to fill a room and cut through the commotion. His dad helped him out by letting Noddy use the family vehicle to drive not just his own band to performances, but also other musicians from the area. Robert Plant, who would later become famous as the lead singer of Led Zeppelin, was one of those young artists. Noddy was already making a name for himself in the professional world by the time he was in his late teens. He became a member of the Mavericks, a band that EMI signed. They made a few singles that didn't go well, but this was the experience Noddy needed. He was finally in the recording studio, working with labels and getting a feel for how the music business truly worked. In 1966, Noddy got his big break when he joined a band named the In-Betweens. It was a local organization that was attempting to figure out who they were. But in just a few years, the band would grow into something much bigger. They formed Slade, the band that would make Noddy Holder a well-known name. Slade came out of nowhere and made a huge impact on British music with their approach. Slade fully embraced glam rock, which was all about show, glitter, and being bold. The crazy clothing, the stomping beats, and the loud guitars were all bigger than life, but the best part was Noddy's recognizable voice, which could convert a song into an anthem. But it wasn't simply his voice, it was also his writing. Noddy wasn't simply the lead singer, he was also one of the key songwriters, working with bassist Jim Lee. They wrote hit after hit, including Mama We're All Crazy Now, Goodbye to Jane, and, of course, Merry Christmas Everybody. That song sold more than 1.1 million copies in the UK and is still around. Noddy's voice comes back every year like clockwork. It has become one of the most well-known Christmas carols of all time since it is played in stores, on the radio, and on TV shows. Slade released 15 albums with their original lineup and a lot of successful songs. They weren't merely part of the glam rock scene. They were the best of the 1970s because of their unique wording in song titles, high-energy concerts, and Noddy's distinctive voice. But even though the ascension was legendary, the life Noddy Holder would have when the spotlight faded was nothing like the fairy tale people might have thought it would be. Fans never saw the hardships, sorrow, and heartbreak that were going on behind the glitter and commotion. The bad side of becoming famous. By the early 1970s, Slade was on fire, and Noddy Holder was at the top of the British rock scene. Their songs weren't just background music, they were events, anthems that people sang at the top of their voices. The rise had been amazing, but no one noticed how much it cost. Because that level of accomplishment, while glamorous on the outside, was really tiring on the inside. Noddy's rise to prominence wasn't easy. Life in Slade meant always recording, always playing, and living out of suitcases for years on end. The pressure grew with each city, each level, and each fan's expectation. Noddy acted like the larger-than-life frontman that fans loved, but underneath the voice and the glitter, he was still a man who never forgot where he came from. This grounding stopped him from going over the deep end like a lot of rock stars his age did. But it didn't keep him from the wear and tear that comes with being famous all the time. There was one moment that could have changed everything for him. After Bon Scott died suddenly in 1980, AC/DC sought a new lead singer. They were well on their way to being one of the largest rock bands in the world, and getting to be their leader would have been a tremendous steal for his career. It is said that Noddy Holder was asked to play the part. He could have left Slade and joined one of the most popular hard rock bands of all time, but he said no. Noddy passed down AC/DC because he was committed to Slade and the bandmates he had established his career with. A lot of people were shocked by the choice. But it demonstrated that he would never leave the ones who had always been there for him. Noddy was able to keep grounded even though he was in the crazy world of the rock scene. He didn't get caught up in the unending cycle of drugs and devastation that took so many stars of that time. People said he possessed a voice that could shake arenas, but off stage, he cared about family, routine, and having fun. He was able to keep calm, which let him endure years in an industry that eats people up. But even with that balance, the problems started to manifest. Noddy had spent more than 20 years of his life with Slade by the early 1990s. He had been the band's frontman for years, touring the world and writing popular songs. It was clear that the stress had gotten to them after more than 26 years. He got burned out and realized that life was passing him by while he was locked in the cycle of touring and recording. Fans were startled when Noddy Holder departed Slade in 1992. It wasn't about anger or a controversy. Noddy needed time for himself, time with his family, and time away from the incessant work that had defined his adult existence. It wasn't easy for Noddy to leave the band that had made him who he was, but he didn't go away. He changed who he was instead. He went from being a rock star to working on TV and radio. He showed a different side of himself in the ITV comedy drama The Grimleys in the late 1990s. He played a strange music instructor, and it was evident that Noddy was more than just a theatrical performance. He was a great actor, and fans adored it. TV opened up new doors. Noddy played himself in many shows, always making people laugh and feel good, and always showing that he could laugh at himself. He also became a regular on the radio, where he told stories about his life and music. Thinking about the good old days of Slade and showing that he was a natural at putting on a show. People who didn't know Slade as a kid now knew him as a funny, charming media figure. People all around the UK loved him for his stories, his sense of humor, and his larger-than-life personality. Even though Noddy Holder seemed to fit right in with this new phase of life, the truth was that years in the spotlight had already worn him down. He got all he ever wanted from being famous. Yet it also wore him down in ways that didn't become evident till later. The constant touring, the stress of managing a band at the top of their game, and the sacrifices he made along the way all had an effect. Noddy was able to avoid the darker side of rock and roll, but he couldn't avoid the fact that celebrity makes people tired. But in true Noddy Holder fashion, he twisted that evil into something that people could still enjoy. He didn't let burnout control him. Instead, he changed direction and became someone who could still make people smile even when he wasn't on stage. But most fans never figured out the real reason why Slade broke up. Their songs will always be associated with pleasant times, but the band's story was full with conflicts that would finally come to light. Slade's problems within himself. At first glance, Slade seemed unstoppable. They had the singles, the tours, the fans, and the enthusiasm of a band that felt like they were meant to rule the stage. But below the shiny surface of the hotel rooms, tour buses, and studios, things were considerably worse. Noddy Holder himself would later characterize the situation with ruthless honesty. He said that the same things that had broken up so many other bands previously had also caused the breakup in Slade. He remarked in an interview that he always says there are 5 reasons why bands break up. The first is egos, the second is money, the third is drugs and alcohol, the fourth is women, and the fifth is musical differences. In Slade's case, it was all 5. This mix was really dangerous. And for a band that was at the top of the charts, it was only a matter of time before it caught up with them. Slade's problems weren't just with people or things that tempted him. They were also about where to go. The band took a big risk in 1975 that exposed how divided they actually were. They made a movie called Slate in Flame. The movie was a shock, not the cheerful, glittery picture viewers were expecting. It wasn't a funny movie or a fun trip through the glam rock era. Instead, it was a gritty, brutally true look at the music business, the greed, the deception, and the human ruin that came with trying to get famous. People who didn't like it loved it. Slade wasn't a ludicrous glam star this time. They were artists exhibiting the dark side of the tech that had helped them. Critics liked the movie, but audiences weren't sure what to think of it. People who wanted to see the band's happy side weren't ready for a story of heartbreak and exploitation. It hurt them in business. The movie hurt their image instead of helping it, and their popularity went down. In a recent interview while speaking about why the movie flopped, Noddy revealed, "It's not at all what people expected from us at the time, particularly the fans. They expected a happy-go-lucky, cheeky-chappy image kind movie. And what they got was this hard-hitting look at what happens when a rock band works in the music business." I suppose the fans were shocked, too. But not everyone in the band had agreed to the project in the first place. Dave Hill, the guitarist, despised it. He had signed up to be in a band known for vitality, flamboyance, and larger-than-life fun, not for a gloomy film that depicted their world in the darkest possible light. Hill's anger at Slade and Flame only made the problems in the group worse. Creative direction had turned into a war zone. While some people wanted to keep things easy and entertaining, Noddy and bassist Jim Lee were willing to take artistic chances. Sadly, this difference would last long after the movie came out, and tensions were already high. A catastrophe hit the band that left scars that would never heal. In 1973, percussionist Don Powell was in a terrible vehicle accident. Angela Morris, his fiancée, died right away, and Powell was badly hurt, including brain damage that will last the rest of his life. He was in a coma for weeks, and when he finally came up, he had trouble remembering things that would bother him for the rest of his life. Powell's injuries didn't just hurt him, they hurt the whole band. As they were making Slade in Flame, he was in such bad shape that he couldn't remember some of his lines, it was said. He actually needed to be reminded of who he was and where he was, even while he was working. The other members had to step in all the time to keep him steady and help him through the process. To the outside world, Slade was still a strong group, but behind the scenes, they were helping each other through things that most fans didn't know about. Noddy Holder would subsequently think back on those years with a mix of pride and sadness. Pride, because the band kept going with their recordings and shows even though everything. But these tensions finally caused the band to fall apart. Slade's career was more than just a job, it was his life. It was heartbreaking to see it fall apart because of ego, tragedy, and conflicts. By the end of the 1970s and the beginning of the 1980s, those tensions had gotten out of hand. The band kept going, getting back on track every now and again and keeping their faithful fans, but they weren't as strong as they used to be since they weren't as united. Noddy's voice had always been what made Slade who they were, but even his voice couldn't drown out the clamor of everything dragging them apart. As the band fell apart, his personal life was going through storms of its own that would put him in even worse and more agonizing situations than the craziness of rock and roll and Noddy's love life drama. Away from the stage lights, the glitter, and the noise of the crowd, Noddy Holder's personal life was just as busy as his work life. Fame can make relationships more difficult. And for someone like Noddy, who spent most of his adult life traveling, recording, and performing, it was never easy to find time for both music and family. His love life brought him both happiness and sadness, and it showed a side of him that people didn't often see. Noddy wed Leandra Russell in 1976. Slade was still a household name and always in the news at the time. Noddy was one of the most famous rock stars in Britain. People thought he had everything. A successful job, a luxurious life, and now a wife by his side. They had 2 kids while they were married, and for a spell, Noddy was both a husband and a father while also being in the band. But the stress of being famous and always being in demand got to them. By the early 1980s, Slade's career was at a turning point, and Noddy himself was tired of the never-ending cycle of concerts and records. It was practically hard to balance family life with that kind of job. So, Noddy and Leandra got a divorce in 1984, after being together for 8 years. It was a hard time for him, not just because his marriage was falling apart, but also because he was determined to stay involved in his girls' lives no matter what else was going on. Noddy spent the next few years working on getting his life back on track away from the craziness of rock and roll. By the end of the 1980s, Slade's best years were over, and Noddy was starting to think about the future in a new way. In 1989, at this time, he met someone who would drastically transform his life. Susan Holder was her name. Susan wasn't in the music industry spotlight like the women Noddy had been around during the crazy years of Slade. She worked in radio and journalism as a television producer. Noddy's independence and determination attracted her right away, especially since she wasn't impressed by his rock star image. She could see the man behind it. Their connection grew steadily, based on something stronger than the tumult of fame. Susan was smart, artistic, and sure of herself. And throughout the years, she became a successful journalist, writer, and broadcaster. She was a regular guest on BBC Radio Manchester and worked on a number of projects that let her show off her own voice and point of view. This relationship was different for Noddy. In this cooperation, each person brought their own interests and skills to the table. Noddy and Susan made it official after being together for more than 10 years. They got married in 2004, not long after they had a son together. They gave him the name Django after the famous jazz guitarist Django Reinhardt. Later, Susan herself talked about what it was truly like to live with Noddy Holder. As a writer and author, she wrote about their life together, giving admirers a rare look into the private lives of a guy who had seemed larger than life for decades. She talked about how funny Noddy was in their relationship, how he welcomed being a parent again later in age, and how hard it was to be married to someone so famous. To people outside, Noddy was still the loud voice of Slade, always linked to Christmas songs and rock anthems. He was just a husband and father at home with Susan and Django. He made dinners, told tales, told jokes, and loved the normal routines of family life that had always been hard to keep up with when he was famous. Many admirers were comforted to hear that Noddy was happy in his personal life. They had seen him on stage for years, heard his voice on many records, and read about his problems and successes in the news. The story felt complete when I knew that he had achieved happiness and security later in life. He had found love that lasted and a family life that kept him grounded after years of glitter, loudness, and exhaustion. This part of his life was happy, but the narrative of Noddy Holder doesn't finish there. Noddy would have to deal with something that no amount of celebrity, devotion, or love could protect him from after years of being happy with Susan and Django and trying to maintain his private life as stable as possible. A sad turn that would rock him, his family, and his followers to the core. The sad turn. Noddy Holder seemed invincible for a long time. He had a booming voice, a strong stage presence, and a good sense of humor. He had been famous for years, burned out, and had personal problems, yet he always came out on top. But in 2018, something happened in his life that no one could have imagined. It was the kind of blow that made him realize he wasn't invincible as a rock star. Sadly, Noddy was found to have cancer of the esophagus. The news was terrible, and the prognosis was even worse. He was told by doctors that he only had 6 months to live. This was a different kind of difficulty for a man who had confronted every kind of problem in music and life. In an interview, he talked about how he received the sad news. He said, "They only gave me 6 months to live, and I knew I'd start cracking jokes, which probably wasn't the best way to handle it. This year, don't bother getting me a birthday card. I have a hard time not taking things too seriously. I began the chemotherapy, but I thought that if it was my time to go, there wasn't much I could do about it. But seriously, the fight ahead was going to be awful." Noddy started treatment at the Christie Hospital in Manchester, which is one of the best places in the UK for cancer therapy. He got experimental chemotherapy, which was risky but may also provide him additional time. It was hard, and the adverse effects never stopped. Noddy's hair fell out completely. His previously strong body reduced to just 8 stone. The toll on his body was huge. This was the same man whose voice had previously filled whole arenas with sound. Now he was at his weakest, struggling not on stage but in a hospital bed. Every day was a test of endurance for him, as well as for Susan and their family, who had to watch him go through it. Later, Susan would admit that the trip had been rather tiring. They were always afraid and unsure of whether any treatment would succeed or fail. But in the thick of that nightmare, she also made it apparent that Noddy's spirit never shattered. His mental attitude and capacity to be positive even when things were at their worst were what kept them all going. Noddy's survival became about more than simply medicine. He said that his recovery was due to his will to be positive. He knew he couldn't stop the disease, but he could change how he thought about it. He faced every appointment, every session, and every failure with the same strength that had helped him survive decades in the harsh world of rock music. The fight was long and hard, but Noddy somehow made it through. The man who was told he had 6 months to live beat the odds. He healed slowly and had a lot of scars, but he lived. For his family, fans, and Noddy himself, that he lived through it was nothing short of a miracle. Later, he said, "I've been told that my mental attitude was a big part of my survival. I don't become too sad. I tried to stay cool and go about my business as usual, but Susan helped me do that. She went through hell and back in secret, yet she was always there for me, fighting and keeping me upbeat. I can be cocky, but I'm glad she was with me." Even though he survived, what he went through was real. Now, the image of the rock star was next to the truth of being weak, sick, and open to attack. It reminded everyone who had ever cheered for him that he was a real person who had to face mortality and fight it head on. Noddy's life changed completely after that. It taught him how fragile life is, how important family is, and how important it is to stay positive and laugh even when things seem impossible. It also showed his supporters a side of him that they didn't often see, a guy without the stage lights, relying only on his resolve and the affection of those around him. But what does that mean for him now? How does Noddy Holder's life change once he fights the fight of his life? The answer is both sad and uplifting. Noddy Holder is 79 years old. Noddy Holder is still here at 79, despite all the predictions, bad news, and skepticism. He is still living, laughing, and carrying the spark that made him so memorable. But his life now is totally different from how it was during his glam rock years. He still goes to frequent checkups because the shadow of cancer is still in his medical records and in his family's minds. What matters, though, is stability, and that's exactly what Noddy has been able to keep. He is still powerful, and that alone feels like a win. Noddy showed the world in 2023 that his spirit and voice had never been stifled. He went back on stage with pianist Tom Seals in authenticity. He recounted stories, sang, and connected with an audience that recognized how important that time was. It wasn't only fun to see Noddy Holder, the guy who was once given 6 months to live, standing and singing again. It showed that you could bounce back. Things are quieter at home now. Noddy resides in Cheshire with his family. He has minor delights in his life that celebrity frequently takes away. Time with Susan, time with his kids, and the peace of not having to chase the demands of the spotlight. He still narrates stories with that recognizable humor and still works for charities. He also still makes occasional appearances on TV and radio. But now he does everything on his own terms. And then, of course, there's his voice. Noddy Holder's voice is not just a part of music history, it is also a part of British culture. His popular Christmas song "It's Christmas" plays all throughout the country every December, on radios, in stores, and at gatherings. His voice has lived through many times, bands, and movements in the music business. It is still instantly recognizable, ageless, and classic. Noddy means more than just music these days. His life is a narrative of strength, humor in the harshest situations, humility after fame, and survival when things were at their worst. To his followers, he is a living reminder that even legends have to fight through hard times. Sometimes the best thing you can do is keep going, not the hit songs or sold-out gigs. Which artist would you love to see Noddy work with? Please leave your answers in the comments below. If you like this video, please click on the next one on your screen, like this one, and subscribe to our channel to get more updates.